Johnny Harris is an incredibly influential person here on YouTube, and he describes himself as an independent journalist. Johnny Harris makes very well-produced videos that get millions of views, but his videos almost always have a hidden agenda and a dark side to them. Johnny uses his platform to convince his viewers that we should have less free speech, that algorithms should have more control over what we watch and how we think, and that corporations having more power is the answer to the world's problems. But Johnny Harris and his team are incredibly skillful at packaging this message into well-produced documentary-like videos. And strangely, despite having this agenda and plenty of powerful connections, Johnny still presents himself as just being an independent journalist helping to educate people. But are you even a journalist when your whole mission is to convince people to follow your own ideology, and when you have even uploaded videos onto your own channel that have been paid for by one of the most powerful capitalist socio-economic organizations on the planet? No, I don't think so. Let's see if you agree. One of Johnny's latest videos is about how Facebook enabled certain segments of the population of Myanmar to spread vile rumors about the Rohingya ethnic group. But while this is naturally despicable, Johnny Harris wants to use this story to convince you that your life, your social media feed, the content you upload, and the content you watch should all be controlled by a company-created algorithm that has an agenda it doesn't even tell you about. Now, Johnny Harris doesn't make it immediately clear that this is the real message of the video, and that's exactly what is so sly about it. Johnny starts out by just telling the story of the Rohingya, but little by little he starts convincing the viewer that we need to support more online censorship if we are to prevent what happened to the Rohingya from happening again. And more specifically, Johnny Harris and Max Fisher, who is also a big part of the video, wants to have smarter algorithms that can easily censor political opponents online, which is a tool that is becoming increasingly more used to control the narrative by those in power. And if you think I'm reaching by claiming that this is the video's agenda, then let's quickly look at Max Fisher, who features heavily in this video. Max Fisher is a person who, judging from his Twitter, is very interested in exactly the type of algorithms mentioned in the video, which of course makes him perfect for this video. But if you look into Max Fisher's online presence, it becomes clear that Max Fisher's real mission isn't just to study algorithms, but actually to push for more advanced algorithms that can better censor viewpoints that he disagrees with. Just listen to Max Fisher in his own words.
The problem is not which posts are allowed and not allowed. And this is something Renee DiResta has really emphasized. It's what gets promoted and it's what gets amplified. And if you had platforms that did not so reliably and consistently amplify the things that were so harmful and so distorting, the free speech question just becomes a lot lower stakes. The potential damage of making the wrong decision one way or another becomes a lot less dangerous, because if you leave something up, if you leave up a piece of hate speech that's getting engagement from 3 people, then it's not good for those 3 people who saw it, but it's ultimately not going to be
You may
dangerous.
be crying fire in a theater, but there's nobody in the theater to hear you.
That's a great way to put it, actually. I like that.
So what Fisher is saying here is companies should avoid allegations of them attacking the right to free speech by simply shadow banning content that Fisher disagrees with instead of totally removing it, because then it's not technically censorship. Yes, Max and Johnny, that's still censorship. It's as if someone said, of course you can voice your concerns regarding my leadership, but only 100 kilometers into the Siberian tundra where nobody can hear you. Naturally, he calls the content he doesn't like conspiracy theories, but it's funny how only viewpoints that he disagrees with are conspiracy theories according to him. I mean, this guy even says Reddit has gotten better over the years thanks to its moderation policy.
The free speech absolutism has this kind of founding ideal in Silicon Valley that if you completely remove the gatekeepers, you completely remove the rules, which you should do because ideas should be completely free, then the best ideas will naturally surface. But it has never worked that way, because what it always favors is, first of all, raw majoritarianism, which we have learned can be a very destructive force, especially on these early social platforms like 4chan and Reddit, but also that the best idea is not going to be the most engaging idea. And so this is why we've seen over and over that pure free speech leads to very intense and extreme version of majoritarianism. And what's ironic is that Reddit has actually gotten much better, and the quality of the discussions and the content on there has improved drastically because they imposed gatekeepers. And because they have people who work very hard at moderating the conversations.
Dude, I can't even post 2 words on Reddit anymore without some power-hungry 17-year-old or a bot banning me. So after learning more about Max Fisher and his agenda, I think we can safely conclude that an incredibly important message in Johnny Harris's video is that censorship is good and you should support it too if you are a good human being. This is incredibly dangerous since it will give people like Max Fisher, internet giants, and governments even more power to manipulate the algorithm so that it shadow bans and limits the reach of topics that don't fit the narrative. It is this biased algorithm that is going to decide what you are going to watch, who gets famous, and what opinions the average person is going to have, and you won't even know it. It's also such a horrible thing to do to creators, since they keep uploading content and putting so much effort into it without knowing that it will never reach a wider audience because someone like Max Fisher or Johnny Harris might think it's problematic. And for the record, it is interesting how Johnny describes the ARSA as an insurgency group that simply fights back despite its leader being an actual Pakistani Taliban affiliate.
In response to these conditions, some Rohingya form an insurgency group and start fighting back.
The group has also killed several less radical Rohingya activists. However, this would obviously complicate the story, and one thing is sure about Johnny Harris: his channel is always more interested in telling a good story than anything else. But isn't it strange how someone can present themselves as an independent journalist while also pushing for less free speech? That's because Johnny Harris isn't a journalist, but more like a mini think tank advocacy group that promotes certain views via video essays and mini documentaries. And despite describing himself as an independent journalist, Harris has also at times partnered up with several very influential organizations. Johnny has, for example, made a video sponsored by the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum being an incredibly influential economic organization that advocates for free market policies, among many other things. The video sponsored by the World Economic Forum is called How China Became So Powerful. But like with the previous video, that isn't really what this video is about.
So you're probably wondering, listen, I clicked on a video about the rise of China, and we're ending here with stakeholder capitalism.
Geez, I wonder why. It's almost like you have some sort of ulterior motive. The video is actually about how awesome capitalism is and about how corporations should have even more political power, which are the two things the World Economic Forum traditionally promotes. The YouTubers Tom Nicholas and Bad and Pana have already made in-depth critiques of this video, so I'm just going to give you a quick rundown. The first point of the video is that countries get richer by being capitalist than by being one-party communist dictatorships where everything is run by corrupt and out-of-touch bureaucrats, which I think almost anyone will agree with. But it is interesting how the video presents free market capitalism as the only alternative to the communist model, despite capitalism also proving to be an incredibly detrimental ideology to everything it touches. And Johnny Harris and the World Economic Forum also acknowledges this problem in the video, but they also have a solution to it: more free market capitalism and more corporate control. The real purpose of the video is to advocate for stakeholder capitalism, a concept that the World Economic Forum has been pushing for recently. The idea of stakeholder capitalism is to give corporations even more power in international politics by making them so-called stakeholders. This would happen by making the UN allow private companies to have even more influence within it to advocate for its interests. This increased influence in global politics will, according to Johnny Harris, make corporations care more about society and less about money. What assurance will there be for that? None. That argument doesn't sound like something an independent journalist would come with, but more something someone paid by, let's say, big business would say. Johnny also contradicts himself in this very same video when he points out that the average person living in the West hasn't gotten any richer in the last 40 years, despite the rich continuing to get richer. Why is this happening? I thought free market capitalism was the second coming of Christ. Well, Johnny does try to explain increasing inequality in the West by saying, quote,
And some of these people in the West have seen their incomes shrink, like the blue-collar workers in Detroit and the Rust Belt whose jobs disappeared to China. So far you can sort of see why this makes sense. The people in China who benefited from this mass industrialization saw huge benefits. And the people here in the United States and in the West who saw jobs go overseas to China saw a way slower growth in their income.
This, however, isn't true. Sure, the world's poor certainly have gotten richer percentage-wise, but if we look at raw changes in income, we can see that the majority of the world's population still earns very little money in comparison to Westerners. So the money hasn't actually gone anywhere. It's merely been accumulated by the richest people in the West that benefit from offshoring jobs. So in reality, the reason why inequality in the West is rising isn't because of globalization nor poor people in Asia. It's because rich people in the West are hoarding their profits, not paying taxes, underpaying workers, and offshoring jobs. But considering that the World Economic Forum is made up of extremely rich Westerners that benefit from these practices, Johnny Harris obviously isn't going to mention this in his video sponsored by the World Economic Forum. Johnny Harris also produced a video about Joe Rogan and his ridiculously successful podcast. Johnny's video about Joe Rogan starts off innocently enough, with Johnny, like usual, explaining to the audience how Joe Rogan became famous in the first place, and how his podcast got so popular by inviting interesting people from all walks of life onto the show. But Johnny quickly reveals the video's true agenda.
Which gets me to my third point, and this is where I have my biggest critique of Joe Rogan. Joe lets people talk, and talk, and talk, and talk.
The principles of human interaction on this planet are largely dictated by our ability to discuss things, even if you disagree.
Ah yes, as we all know, a true journalist hates when people are allowed to talk. The real message of the video is that Johnny thinks that Joe Rogan should practice far more self-censorship when it comes to who he lets onto his own show. You see, Johnny Harris really doesn't like when people with views he considers abhorrent are given any sort of platform to voice their opinion, and Joe Rogan does exactly that. In fact, people like Joe Rogan because he lets people talk, instead of just trying to use every interview as an excuse to try to do a character assassination of the person who agreed to the interview. Joe Rogan does not care one bit about appealing to people like Johnny Harris by playing thought police. Rogan simply brings on people that he finds fascinating and lets them talk, and that's exactly why people like the podcast. And Johnny Harris even has to admit that in the video.
People love to listen to a guy whose views and language are all over the place. I think for a lot of people, it's like a respite from the predictable lineup of popular voices that tow a predictable list of beliefs, opinions, views, and enemies.
But what Johnny clearly does not understand is that a person who is open-minded and believes this strongly in actual free speech simply won't submit to the demands of people like Johnny Harris, who wishes to control all information because they are afraid that people might arrive at different conclusions when presented with more viewpoints. Instead, Johnny Harris accuses Joe Rogan of selling contrarianism by daring to include vocal people with every type of political opinion, even some people that even I consider pretty spacey.
My heart's big. It's got hot blood going through it fast. I like to eat. I like to have children.
But what Johnny calls contrarianism is just allowing people from all sides of the spectrum to speak their piece, not only people who have been pre-approved by the mainstream, which is one of the most important parts of free speech. But again, Johnny doesn't like that. Johnny Harris, as we could also see earlier in the part regarding algorithms, wants a world in which people aren't necessarily jailed for their views, but are instead completely censored into oblivion. And I want to be clear, people who advocate for violence against individuals or groups of people should of course not be allowed on any platform. But we have to allow people to speak, because the alternative is allowing people like Johnny, HR types, company executives, and mainstream politicians to decide who gets to be heard, and that is obviously very dangerous to any free society. So, all in all, I think it's very clear that Johnny Harris is not a journalist, because a journalist does not make videos paid for by the World Economic Forum. A journalist does not advocate for algorithms that secretly promote certain political views while demoting and shadow banning others. A journalist makes actual documentaries instead of dressing up political talking point videos as documentaries. A journalist wants everyone to speak, even though that does not mean he should be uncritical of the person being interviewed. Johnny Harris is a commentator, a political activist, and a YouTuber, but not a journalist. Let me know what you think about this in the comment section. Finally, a huge thank you to my patrons and my YouTube channel members for making this video possible. You guys are a huge help, since this project is what the majority of my time gets spent on. If you also want to make more videos like this one possible, then consider joining them in supporting my channel on Patreon or as a YouTube channel member. If you support me on either of these platforms, you receive benefits like early access to new videos, behind the scenes content like uncut videos, raw scripts for upcoming videos, and finally you receive a shout out at the end of every video. The current patrons and YouTube channel members that are making these videos possible are Justin, Luke, Gene, and Laurentius. You guys are amazing.